If you want these protections, you have to demand them. No one is demanding them for us. If we want the seafood in our area and the shellfish tested, we have to demand the testing. If we want the fish tested, we have to demand the freshwater and saltwater fish tested. We want the produce tested. We had to demand we community groups had to demand the produce get tested. So it really is concerned communities fighting for this right to information. And the reason why all of this is a worthy fight is we learned 2 years ago that Chemours wanted to expand production. And our community was reignited and more fury. We were already pissed at Chemours and DuPont for the decades of harm they caused. But the fact that they want to make more when they still haven't fully cleaned up the problem in our region, it pissed us off so much that we reached out to the United Nations Human Rights Council. We got the UN to do an investigation. And just last year, they called out DuPont and Chemours and federal and state health and environmental regulators for business-related human rights abuses. We had categorized all of the rights that we felt were being violated, and it was very powerful to have that recognition on an international stage. And communities just need to continue to push because these are your rights. And your rights are getting trampled for businesses, for the wealthy 1%.
Hi, welcome to an edition of Code Green Conversations for a Future We Want and Our Kids Deserve. It is one I am very eager, anxious even to jump into. I am very honored to have a guest that is passionate, knowledgeable. In fact, was just in a Senate subcommittee hearing yesterday. She is Emily Donovan, and she is part of the National PFAS Contamination Coalition, which I just recently found out about. She's also the co-founder of Clean Cape Fear. It's a grassroots community group based in North Carolina. And we're going to talk today about this alphabet soup, PFAS, PFOs, PFOAs. Welcome, Emily.
Welcome. It's great to be here.
And we're not going to talk about the full word. The abbreviations stand for words that may be as hard to say as it is hard to get rid of forever chemicals. Took your year to pronounce them. I'm not even going to try. Okay, so we're talking about a class of forever chemicals. Why are we talking about it? Because many of us assumed that some of those, toxic chemicals we heard about were in Teflon nonstick pans, that they were forbidden, that they weren't in our products anymore. And so to learn that the Trump administration, in all its wisdom, just last month, somehow loosened restrictions on use of some of these toxic chemicals. Not only was that outrageous for those who are paying attention, of course, it never gets enough attention in mainstream media. Why would this matter to people? But it happened to be the same week that I had a very extensive blood test done for a longevity, doctor. And I was shocked to find out, this is personal, but it's probably impacting everybody, that I have very high levels of all these. I don't know if you can see all these PFOs, PFOAs. It's basically like an eye exam, okay? And speaking of eye exam, I'm sorry about these glasses. They're so cute, I know, but I had cataract surgery removal earlier in the week, so I need to wear them. But I see clearly. Boy, do I see clearly, a little too clearly. And so do you, Emily. Where do we begin? Oh, my goodness.
I mean, I think the first thing is that we need to start by just quickly understanding we are talking about PFAS, PFAS. This is stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. It is a class. The EPA says there's about 14,000 different PFAS in the environment. There's probably about hundreds of them being used in commercial uses. The problem with them is that many of them bioaccumulate. All of them are called forever chemicals for a reason because there is no proven safe disposal method and they do not naturally degrade in the environment. So meaning that the chemicals that were made in the 1950s are probably still circulating through the environment on top of all of the new releases that are continuously getting pumped into our environment over and over again. And how I got brought into this situation is that I unfortunately live downstream of one of the most notorious manufacturers of this chemistry, DuPont, which spun off into Chemours. And so happy to chat more about that if you're interested.
Oh, yes, very interested, highly interested. So tell us about your 8-year journey as an activist, something I guess you didn't expect to be doing at this point in your life.
Yeah, no, I mean, I started out as as a youth director at a local church. So I spent all my time taking teenagers on mission trips and faith trips. And we learned about this through our local newspaper. In fact, our water utility had known for a full year beforehand. They were a part of a research study and they did not alert their ratepayers. It took a reporter who happened to stumble upon an academic article in a journal that recognized this was a problem. And it created massive protests, as you could imagine, in our community to learn about it because many of us knew it was happening with Parkersburg, West Virginia. We had seen the reporting. I think there was a couple months prior, this big settlement that had happened in Parkersburg, West Virginia with residents there. And so to find out that we were going through a parallel experience, but were completely unaware was just gut-wrenching and devastating. There's a great movie called Dark Waters starring Mark Ruffalo, which tells the story of Rob Bilott, the lawyer who happened to learn about this massive chemical cover-up. Highly recommend watching that. And so what we have done in these last 8 years is we have been kind of focused on three things for our community: stopping all our PFAS exposures, making sure that the polluters pay and that our elected leaders are held accountable, and ensuring that we understand the health risks. Because like you just pointed out, I'm sure you're feeling the same way we felt years ago, which is this is in my blood. What does this mean? What does this mean for my health? How can I be proactive? How can I be preventative? And unfortunately for us at the time, there was no literature to inform us on what some of the precautions we could be taking, or even what we should, did this cause that? We had a tremendous amount of confusion and concern. There is a pediatric cancer mom support group in the area that started showing up to local meetings saying, is this why my child developed a kidney cancer, kidney disease? We had a lot of people with thyroid issues questioning, is there an increased rate? Do we have cancer clusters in this area? And so we still have that uncertainty. And on this journey, through all of this uncertainty, formed Clean Cape Fear. And we filmed around a dining room table one Sunday afternoon, former mayor, doctor, faith leader, educators, environmentalists. We all just said it's going to take a massive community response to take on this big notorious polluter. And that's what we've been trying to do.
And Cape Fear, you said, is a river where you get your drinking water.
Yes, absolutely. So the Cape Fear River is the largest river system in North Carolina. It provides 1.5 million residents with drinkable water, and we are sit at the very bottom of the river near the Atlantic Ocean, and so we kind of are very vulnerable to anything that is put into the river upstream of us, and that is where Chemours sits. Chemours is right upstream of us and had been dumping their waste stream, their manufacturing waste directly into the river without telling regulators, without telling anybody. And we were drinking that waste for nearly half a century.
And you have young children.
I raised my children on this water, yes. I moved to this area 7 months pregnant. And, I just testified before Congress yesterday and I told them that I thought I was doing something good for my children by giving them water because water should be good for children. And lo and behold, I was giving them like the toxic experience that I was unaware of.
Oh, there's so many angles on this story: political, personal, health, environmental impact, bees. I mean, it are we really living in this moment in 2025? It's just surreal and it keeps getting more so. Let's start with the political, just to kind of just the backdrop of, what Biden did to help protect people from these pesticides, these forever chemicals used in pesticide products, I guess, but also in cookware, in Scotchgard, in some clothing, I guess. And now those restrictions, those limits are being loosened, and they're not even pretending that, that's okay. They're just doing it. And too many Americans are in the dark, don't know. And dark waters is what we're getting, and dark everything, dark health.
Right, right. So, when we learned first about our contamination crisis, it was under the first Trump administration. And so this is not our first rodeo with a Trump administration. We, luckily enough, and I will say, I got to give a huge shout out to the National PFAS Contamination Coalition because there are community groups just like mine all over the country. And when we were able to realize that we were not alone and we could join forces and use kind of collective power, that really did start moving mountains. So through the first Trump administration, we fought hard to try and get drinking water standards. We fought to get protections. We had a, like a page long list of all the things, all the failures that happened along the way that we felt if we could get those corrected at the federal level, it would protect other Americans from the nightmare that we were living in. Um, what we found with the first Trump administration was a lot of talk and not a lot of gain. So there was really they didn't put any dates to things. They would do really great press releases. They would say, yes, we think this is a problem and we'll work on it. And then we wouldn't see any dates or promises of that work ever coming online. When the Biden administration came online, that is when we really started seeing dates. We started seeing the Biden administration saying, we are going to get you drinking water standards. We are going to get hazardous substance designation because we do think the polluters should be paying for the cleanup and not the communities. And then, we were pushing for more. We wanted protections for our food, protections for the source water, prevention. Let's stop approving new uses for PFAS. Let's stop approving new PFAS. Let's stop shipping international waste across the ocean and bringing them into facilities. Let's look at the whole chain of the process of using this chemistry. Let's not put them into landfills where they could leach out into the groundwater and the surrounding communities. So we were having massive conversations with the government at the time, and they were doing really good work to hear our needs. And then obviously the administration switched, and now we have Trump administration 2.0, and we are seeing all of that work get rolled back. They earlier this year announced that they were going to strip away some of the drinking water standards that we got. And the one that impacts us the most, in my mind, is the GenX. So GenX is the chemical replacement for PFOA, which is what DuPont was making. And that's what they primarily use for nonstick. It's their Teflon brand of chemistry. And they replaced that probably about 10, 15 years ago with GenX. And we're now starting to see GenX in tap water. And so we got drinking water standards under the Biden administration, and now the Trump administration wants to roll those back, and
And
along with a couple of others. I was just in the House yesterday in D.C. testifying before the House subcommittee on the environment or energy and commerce subcommittee in the environment, and they were discussing whether they wanted to weaken the hazardous substances designations for PFOA and PFOS. And I think it's important to remember that PFOA and PFOS are no longer in commercial use. That was a voluntary decision that 3M and DuPont at the time made. And so when this is really important because those are showing up all across the country because there were decades and decades of uses and releases. But that is just a sliver of the problem. Not, these are considered legacy compounds. And because they're no longer in commercial use, we need to be addressing them while also addressing the chemistry that is in commercial use. So, and that's why we have been pushing very strongly to talk about these chemicals as a class. The whole entire class of PFAS chemistry needs to be regulated as hazardous substances. There needs to be a drinking water standard for all of it. It is just that important.
Gen X, is that better than?
Turns out GenX is not better. Here's yet another case of where there was a substitute made and it was made regrettably or detrimentally to the health and well-being of my community and probably others that are being equally exposed. GenX was thought to be less toxic, but they were only looking at one factor, and that was bioaccumulation. So GenX doesn't build up in the body in the same at the same level that its former predecessor did, PFOA, but it's turning out to be as toxic and in some cases more toxic. And one thing to consider about that is while bioaccumulation is incredibly important, but so is toxicity. Because if you are constantly being exposed to a toxin, over time your body's going to carry that burden. And the best analogy I've heard is a couple of scientists have explained, drinking alcohol. You have one or two glasses, you're going to feel the effects of it for a couple of hours, and then it's going to flush through your system and leave your bloodstream. But if you were drinking alcohol regularly over your lifetime, well, you're going to start seeing some impacts. We know this. And it's similar with this chemistry. It's similar with Gen X.
And we don't have any say in this. They're just dumping this into our water supply and elsewhere. And a lot of people don't know. And we'll get to the what can be done part, but I want to talk a little bit more about the full impact. And so, was there an outcome to the hearing?
So we are going to wait and see. I mean, obviously, this was a crazy time, quite honestly, to have this hearing. It was also flyout day, so Congress is about to leave to take a break for the holidays. So we'll find out more when we get back. But the hearing was because there is a bill being put before the House, and the bill is should there be exemptions given to water utilities, landfills, and I think a handful of um, other entities that are claiming that they are quote unquote passive receivers, meaning that, hey, we didn't cause this problem. We understand that the chemistry is showing up in our pipes, but we didn't put it there, and so we should not be held liable for any of the cleanup. Don't make us have to pay for cleanup because it really wasn't our problem. And while I am sympathetic to that, because we understand that landfills are owned by municipalities, which are owned by communities, so taxpayers are going to be on the hook for it. What I do want everybody to remember is that there is a chain of accountability that needs to be maintained, and that chain of accountability is making sure that everybody equally comes to the table on a problem. And if you start taking out pieces, if you start giving exemptions to certain certain members of the accountability chain, well, you start weakening accountability completely. And so this problem, while many of us did not create it, I do believe all of us are responsible for a solution. And the number one perpetrator are the chemical companies, DuPont, Chemours, 3M. I mean, there's only about 12 PFAS manufacturers in the entire world. They 100%, everything should fall at their doorstep. However, when people knew that these chemicals were toxic and still chose to use them, well, they started consenting to being part of the problem. And so we do know that there are bad actors. We know that there are utilities upstream of us in North Carolina that were allowing these chemicals to pass through their waste stream, and they were not instituting pretreatment programs that were at their disposal. It is the responsibility of a wastewater treatment plant to make sure that before it discharges into a river, which is used as a body of a supply of drinking water for people downstream, that it should be making sure that it is doing it morally and ethically correct, and removing any contaminants that could cause public health harm.
Well,
So
yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So we have seen, so we know there's bad actors in this, tied up in some of these groups that are claiming they want exemptions. And so if you give exemptions to the good actors, you're also giving exemptions to the bad actors.
Mm.
And that I think is a real problem. And then where do you draw the line? Because what I heard yesterday at the hearing was everybody wanted an exemption. And so we start opening up a Pandora's box, and Congress needs to be really careful about doing this. They've never done it before for the Superfund law for this very reason. They've always allowed the EPA to carry discretion in this,
Mm.
and they should continue to allow the EPA to have full discretion over going after polluters through Superfund law.
Except the EPA is now the Environmental Plundering Agency.
There are still, I mean, I absolutely understand that at the highest ranks there are that this administration is doing its level best to erode public trust within the EPA. There are still, I believe, some good actors within the EPA that are just trying to do their job. And that's definitely a topic for another day.
And Lee Zeldin, what's your opinion of him leading this agency?
You know, um, he's a bait and switch in my mind. He came in, he had a track record of understanding PFAS and of really standing up for his community in New York. So there was high hopes within contaminated community groups that he was going to understand PFAS and keep it a bipartisan topic and ensure that the polluters paid and that justice would be sought. And what we have seen is an absolute erosion of it. He's taking a very narrow focus. He's allowing industry to have an outside say, an outsized say in this cleanup process, and is okay stripping the drinking water standards for GenX and the other commercially relevant PFAS.
So much for Make America Healthy Again. Maha, haha. Is that a joke?
I mean, it's interesting because we do know a lot of MAHA that in our community who did have high hopes, and they are disappointed.
disappointed and I would think kind of angry. I would be. I am.
I would hope they're angry. And what I would hope they do is recognize that they still have tremendous power and that their voice carries a lot of weight. And they need to get very vocal about this and start demanding better because, they chose, they chose to stand behind this administration. They need to hold them accountable. That's what we did when we stood behind the Biden administration. We held the Biden administration accountable every step of the way.
When you hear Republican candidates talk about anything environmental, it's struck me that they always say the same thing. We're for clean air and clean water. They never mention climate change. That's not an accident. Well, they're not even for clean water.
I will say what was kind of interesting yesterday in the hearing is that, and one thing that we've noticed on the ground is that PFAS seems to be the one thing that does unite the country. We all understand that this is bad. Where people start getting divided is the solutions to fix it. And that's where it's become very difficult to hold everybody together and all focused on the same path forward. And so we heard a lot of sympathy from Republicans yesterday in the House telling us that, they understand PFAS is a problem. But then we also heard them, being incredibly sympathetic to the needs of the water utility lobby group, which I do just want to point out. And this, again, we could do a whole nother podcast on the water utility lobby group, but I think they are the biggest problem with the state of public drinking water in America. So the American Water Works Association represents over 85% of water in the United States, of public water systems in the United States. What I did not hear from them yesterday, I did not hear them say we need to protect source water. I did not hear them ask for more funding. When farmers need a bailout, they're very vocal, and Congress steps up to the plate, and Congress makes sure that our food supply never goes, never gets completely sacrificed. Water should be treated the same way. And what we haven't seen is we haven't seen the water utility industry actually ask for more money and make sure that infrastructure in America is affordable and is well maintained.
How outrageous and blatant is making the problem worse at a time when we're just learning about how bad forever chemicals are? And we're going to get into the health impacts in just a moment.
Yeah, I absolutely think that we're moving in the completely wrong direction. I will say that where we saw steps forward with the Biden administration, I honestly didn't think the Biden administration went far enough, fast enough in the 4 years that they were working on it, and we kept telling them that every step of the way. You're not doing enough. You need to do more. You're going too slow. You need to move faster. And what we're seeing with the Trump administration is that they have no problem moving fast. They're just moving fast backwards. And this is complete harm for Americans. And it's happening so fast that I don't think Americans can fully register and understand the impacts of it. I know myself 8 years ago when I turned on the tap water, I just assumed it was clean and safe. And then I started learning way more about the tap water industry than I ever wanted to know. And I have learned that a lot of utilities have very good intentions, but they also seem to be more focused on liability within the community than providing the best quality water. Again, because we're not seeing them protecting the source water. Now, we're not seeing them uniting in state legislatures and pressuring, um, standing up with the environmentalist community. Like it would make sense that we would all be a big coalition together, right? We all want the same thing, healthy drinking water, and we want it cheaply. And if we want that cheaply, we need to protect the source of the drinking water, not turn a blind eye and say, well, don't make me regulate that, because that's what we've been seeing the water utility industry do is they go to DC and they counsel in local communities to go to their state areas and all do the same thing, which is don't make us regulate this. Don't make us be liable for this.
That's their concern. Uh, there's so many rollbacks that the Trump administration has made in only the first year. I don't know what's going to be left of our planet and our health, God forbid, if he's there for, no, can't even think that way. Um, this one is personal, though. I mean, they rolled back the endangerment clause. They're getting rid of every mention of climate change in any kind of, government agency. That makes a lot of sense, right? Rolling back fuel efficiency standards. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's all crazy. But this one hits close to home. And finding out that I, a greenie from, most of my adult life, am contaminated with these forever chemicals, what does that mean? And how many Americans are also contaminated, would you think? And where do you think I might have been exposed? And what can I do about it? In the last few minutes, I have to ask you all those questions.
Yeah, well, the one thing that we've learned along the way is that 90, I believe like 97, 98% of all Americans have detectable levels of PFAS in their blood. Like that is something that you go to the CDC's website and they'll go ahead and acknowledge. We were a part of a group that worked with the National Academies of Science to get clinical guidance established so that when you do go to your doctor and you do get your blood test, that you can actually maybe take that results to your clinician and talk through it. So the federal clinical guidance that is available right now for PFAS is something that the National PFAS Contamination Coalition worked very hard to secure. When you go to your doctor, they will have a list of tests that they could run of some predisposed conditions that you may or may not have. And so you can, if you want to kind of go research those further, you can go to the National Academies of Science. You can Google that and Google PFAS clinical guidance, and you can kind of see and explore the documentation and understand a little more for yourself what doctors are being recommended to do. Things that we're noticing is high cholesterol, a higher risk of certain cancers, and if you have kind of levels of PFAS that puts you in a risk category, they might start testing and monitoring for that. The one thing that we don't have right now is making sure that this is covered under insurance. And so that is a problem. And so there's a barrier of privilege attached to your ability to be able to afford a PFAS blood test, and then your ability to be able to ask for those secondary tests from your doctor if you fit into a certain risk category.
Well, if 98% of Americans are exposed to this and have this, I'm not unique. And in this case, I'm not glad that 98 that I'm not alone. But what does that mean? Is forever in my body? Those are some of the health outcomes potentially. Is there anything that one can do? Like when you find out you've got mercury and lead in your system, I've still got mercury, even though I thought I'd had it all removed years ago. There's processes, procedures you can at least try to minimize, lower your levels. Is there any fix for these lovely
Yeah.
chemicals?
No, I think that's a great question. And you're right. You had also asked earlier, how can we, reduce our exposures and where do you think your exposures came from? So we really don't know. But one thing that the scientific community has been saying over and over again is always check your tap water. So you can go and look at find out if you have a water bill, find out where your water's coming from. And then you can go look at the annual report. There's a consumer confidence report that every utility provides. And you can see they are supposed to test for PFAS. And so you can go and look and see, okay, did you have levels of PFAS in your tap water? So that's one step. If it came from your tap water, there are certain filters that you can buy that are effective at removing it. And the Environmental Working Group has a really great filter guide.
Mm.
Um, and so I can send those links and maybe you can promote those. That helps the average American try and figure out, do you need an under sink filter or will a countertop filter work just enough for you? Aside from if you had, so drinking water is always the first place we start. And then after that, a lot of scientists recommend looking your next exposure is probably coming from maybe the food supply. And that one, sadly, is one that we are having a very difficult time wrapping our head around because there is no easy way to test for PFAS in food. And so there's been a big push, and the National PFAS Contamination Coalition was a part of this push, and it was to work with major fast food companies to get them to remove PFAS from their fast food packaging because we felt like that was research was showing that was where some of this was coming up. So like we got McDonald's to voluntarily phase out the use of PFAS in their food packaging wrappers. We know pizza boxes. One of the biggest ones that shocked and surprised me was microwavable popcorn.
Yeah.
So stay away from microwavable popcorn. It has some of the highest levels that I have seen. There was a study that came out, I think last year, and it was off the charts. Other ways that become a lot more trickier to manage is, if bodies of water are contaminated, if the air is contaminated, then crops can become contaminated. Like we learned near the Chemours facility in Fayetteville, North Carolina, residents were worried about their backyard gardens. A lot of them love to garden and live off the food in their backyard, but they were worried about increased exposures from the air releases and the air pollution. And sure enough, scientists came and studied, and they found that certain crops carried were being grown in contaminated soil and contaminated water, and it was making those foods equally contaminated. And so that is another issue. So we need to work with the USDA. We need to work with the FDA to start testing America food supply and make sure that we are finding where there's high concentrations of PFAS in food and getting it out. We found PFAS contamination in shellfish. We've seen it in fish. There's a PFAS fish advisory in the Cape Fear River right now, and it is there's so much contamination in the Cape Fear River that the advisory basically says that there's certain species of fish, they only recommend eating one a year of
And
that.
shellfish, which is something I like.
For shellfish, there is we right now North Carolina does not have a consumption advisory for shellfish. And again, we're playing catch up. But and here's the one thing that I must stress to anyone who's listening is if you want these protections, you have to demand them. It is that is the one thing that we have learned is that no one is demanding them for us. If we want the seafood in our area and the shellfish tested, we have to demand the testing. If we want the fish tested, we have to demand the freshwater and saltwater fish tested. We want the produce tested. We had to demand we community groups had to demand the produce get tested. So it really is concerned communities fighting for this right to information.
Mhm.
And I just want to point out something. All of this, we learned 2 years ago. But all of this is a worthy fight, is what I wanted to say. And the reason why all of this is a worthy fight is we learned 2 years ago that Chemours wanted to expand production, and our community was reignited and more fury. We were already pissed at Chemours and DuPont for the decades of harm they caused, but the fact that they want to make more when they still haven't fully cleaned up the problem in our region, it pissed us off so much that we reached out to the United Nations Human Rights Council, and we got we got the UN to do an investigation. And just last year, they called out DuPont and Chemours and federal and state health and environmental regulators for business-related human rights abuses. And we had categorized all of the rights that we felt were being violated, and it was very powerful to have that recognition on an international stage. And communities just need to continue to push because these are your rights. And your rights are getting trampled for businesses, for the wealthy 1% that is making money and profiting off of our pain and our suffering, our illnesses, sickness, and even not, this is not a hyperbole, but we've had 4 friends die that joined our fight, shared their stories, went to Congress with me. And yesterday, when I was updating Congress, I was just reminded, I had to remind them, that since the last time I was there 7 years ago, 4 people had already passed away.
Mm.
That this is, some of us don't have the luxury of time to redirect the conversation and ask for exemptions. We all need to be bringing ourselves to the table with the sense of urgency that this issue demands.
Okay, so I think there's nothing I can do about these chemicals in my body, if that's what you're saying. I'm asking for the other 98%.
Yeah, unfortunately, right now, I don't know that there's any proven method to
Remove.
remove them. There are some. I know the firefighting community has like, very extreme levels for because of the nature of their occupation, and they are in some clinical trials to try and figure out how to remove the PFAS from their body. I think the best thing that we can do is just thoughtfully try and stop as many exposures as we can on a personal level and then on a policy level, but not drive yourself crazy because it is nearly impossible. The best solution at the end of the day is we just need to ban this chemistry completely so that we can give our bodies a fighting chance to recover and heal.
And what about giving our kids and grandkids a fighting chance? Are these chemicals passed on in breastfeeding? She
Uh,
asked with a 2-year-old granddaughter if she loves more
yeah,
than life.
so women, yeah, there's multiple studies that are now showing that women carry an incredible body burden, and babies are being born already contaminated. So there are studies that are showing that if the mother is contaminated, the baby through the umbilical cord and the uterus is becoming equally contaminated, and so the babies are being born contaminated, and yes, the breast milk is contaminated, and that is an incredibly sensitive topic because there's a lot of mothers who 100% want to give their children the best start in life. And breast milk has always been the best start in life. And it should still be. This is nature's first milk. It absolutely should be treated as sacred. And so I am not advocating that any mother stop breastfeeding their child. We know that, formulas can be contaminated, and the water you mix your formula with could be equally contaminated. So, this is a personal decision that every parent has to make. And at the end of the day, what we need to focus on is we need to stop these exposures at their source, have thoughtful regulations, but also informed consent. I think the better educated you are, the better decisions you can make for yourself, your babies, and your family.
Let's just say we had smart leadership in this country that valued health highly, public health. If all of a sudden someone came in, Congress, whatever, said we're going to ban all these, you're going to have to find a safer, cleaner substitute. Or what would be the end of the world if we didn't have Scotch Guard on everything, or we didn't have, nonstick pans? Isn't there a trade-off there?
You know what? Europe is this is a really great question, and Europe is trying to answer that. So the EU is actually looking at putting a ban on PFAS, and so they're removing them from essential uses. So the majority of the PFAS that we've come across are really they're luxury chemicals. They're just convenience chemicals. They're put in things to make life easier and better, but no one ever told us what the trade-offs were from a health perspective. And so now we're starting to become more aware and push back and educate ourselves. We're finding you don't need a non-stick pan. You can cook really well and not spend forever scrubbing a pan. If you learn certain techniques with stainless steel, that's what my house does. There's cast iron, cooks well and is relatively non-stick when you use it correctly. So there's all these different things that we can do to minimize our consumer expo you can do the power of the purse and limit your exposure through consumer spending. Then there are areas where it becomes less easy, and Europe is looking at what they're calling an essential use ban. And so it's what are the areas that are considered technically essential right now, and they're gonna give manufacturers a little more time to try and find a better replacement. And so this is what we could absolutely be doing now. Minnesota's doing it. Minnesota did pass last year legislation on behalf of a girl named Amara. So Amara Strandy, I know her family well, and Amara passed away. 3M was right in her backyard, and Amara died of an illness that she believes was caused by her PFAS exposures from 3M. And she went to the state legislature and she convinced Minnesota to pass a PFAS ban on products. And so that's what they're looking at right now. And so Minnesota, we need to send them a big thank you, but we also need to protect them and make sure that that law stays on the books because industry is coming at them hard and trying to roll it back. So there's a lot of pressure and a lot of pushback happening. Our federal government could do what Europe is doing and what Minnesota is doing, what Maine's doing, what California is doing. There's a lot of states that are coming together and is starting to push back, saying we don't need this. Our federal government can make it a lot easier and say the same. The biggest caveat in all of this that I have learned from PFOA being phased out and replaced with something equally, if not more toxic in GenX is when we do find replacements, we need to codify federally that they are green chemistry replacements. So there is the green chemistry is an understanding within the EPA that you have to meet certain criteria to make sure that you're non-toxic, non-harmful to the environment. We are not requiring that right now. We are allowing industry to self-regulate. We're allowing industry to come up with substitutions while they hide some of the more negative impacts of those substitutions, and we need to stop allowing that. And we need to create a formal process to approve new replacements through a green chemistry lens.
and we need to stop this interview. I could go on, and I hope we can do part two soon. Didn't even get into the impact on insects and animals, the birds and the bees. And those bees out there, they're responsible for pollinating something like a third of all crops. Like the whole food chain, the whole ecosystem, it's all connected. The repercussions are mind-boggling and not in a good way. But you are a very good citizen doing what you're doing, and I want to thank you. Keep it up. We have to be louder, and that's why I'm doing Code Green, conversations for a future we want and our kids deserve. I hope you will go to our YouTube channel and subscribe. You, Emily, and everyone listening and everyone concerned. We do these interviews weekly, and you'll get notified. And having done this for 28 years or so, I really do know the best and the brightest on all shades of green. And every day there's more problems, but more solutions and more solutionaries. So thank you. Let's hope we all have a healthier 2026 with people like you out there fighting. We got a fighting chance. Thanks so much.
Thank you.